In Dr. Stephen Gundry's best-selling book, The Plant Paradox, he says lectins are microscopic proteins that plants evolved to defend themselves from predators, including insects and animals, that includes humans. They are essentially indigestible and have the unique ability to increase the permeability of your intestines. That means that they can pass through the wall of your gut and will and be treated as foreign invaders by your immune system. This causes an inflammatory response, which can set the stage for a host of diseases as well as weight gain. What foods are rich in lectins? Generally speaking, all grains and legumes have more lectins than anything else, and in some cases, pressure cooking can destroy the lectins. Nightshade vegetables, squashes, and select nuts and seeds are also rich in lectins. Do you agree with Dr. Gundry? Why or why not?
Well, I think that there's clearly some patients that are sensitive to various food factors in virtually any food you can identify. You can find patients that will have sensitivities. And I have no doubt that there are patients that have sensitivities to grains and legumes. We certainly see those in practice. And for those people, we eliminate those foods and we use other sources of plant-based starches as a source of calories. And sometimes there's a little bit of experimentation that goes on, particularly post-fasting. People are very sensitive and reactive. You just rotate foods in, watch what they can eat and what they can't eat. Sometimes with fasting that changes because probably of the healing of gut leakage. Some of the problems here is you have a damaged or inflamed gut that lends itself to leaking more of these proteins that normally would be filtered out by a healthy intestinal mucosal membrane. And so one thing is in healthy people, they may be less vulnerable to these things, but in people that do have those problems, you can certainly use rotational feeding to identify and eliminate or minimize exposure to the foods that people seem to be sensitive to. Some people, you can feed them something once a week that you may not be able to feed them every day. Some people, you can just eliminate those whole classes of foods. And I have no problems. If the people don't do well with rice and beans, don't use rice and beans. Use starchy vegetable material. And most of the foods that we find people do very well with are the very foods, for example, that you could feed an infant. So if you think about a baby's more vulnerable and sensitive gastrointestinal mucosa, you wouldn't feed them certain, highly processed foods, whereas things like squashes and avocados or bananas or whatever it is, the foods that you normally can feed your infants, ironically enough, oftentimes are well tolerated by people that have very sensitive digestive systems. And those foods that generally aren't that tolerated, maybe those should be on the list of foods that you hold off on until the gut has actually had a chance to heal.
There are so many paleo, keto, Atkins, low-carb authors and books. Why are so many people who are well-educated, credentialed, and smart concluding that the low-carb diet, not the whole food plant-based diet, is best for human health? And what are the most compelling, important, and convincing studies that make you believe that a whole food plant-based diet is the proper diet for humans and that a diet that includes animal products is not?
Yeah, well, there's a pretty big literature. There are some people that have summarized that literature well in their books, Dr. John McDougall, T. Colin Campbell, Caldwell Esselstyn, and others that have done an excellent job of reviewing the literature in support of the idea that a whole plant food diet may be a health-promoting diet. There's epidemiological literature. In our practice, we see for the last 34 years, we've been using a whole plant food SOS-free diet with patients coming in with these conditions, the hypertension, the diabetes, the autoimmune disease, and we're seeing and documenting the results that we're able to achieve and maintain in those patients. And we're getting the 30 and 35-year follow-up on patients, where one of the most common comments they'll make is that everybody they know that followed the dead Dr. Atkins diet and all that are dead. So, the idea that whole plant food diets are a question as being a health-promoting diet, I think there's a pretty strong literature out there. It's broad, it's diverse. There's specific studies done ranging from Gene Orrish and others looking at the reversal of coronary artery disease. As far as the paleo diets, the Atkins diets, a lot of these are attempts to provide, their argument is basically this is a less bad diet than the conventional standard American diet with 86% of carbohydrates coming from refined carbohydrates and the use of all kinds of highly processed foods. They're not really comparing it to a whole plant food SOS-free diet. So those studies we need to do demonstrating the efficacy. That's not really what's going on. They're looking at all carbohydrates as the same, and of course they don't react in the body the same. There is a difference between sugars and complex carbohydrates and how the body processes, the effect on insulin, the effect on glucose levels, and how the response clinically manifests itself. So although we might all agree that refined carbohydrates create a lot of problem, the basic fuel of human beings by design from the beginning of time has been complex carbohydrates. The fact that people can subsist on a higher fat, higher protein diet doesn't make it necessarily health promoting. And of course, there is no literature supporting that a long-term high fat, high protein diet is a desirable diet. In fact, even the people that advocate those diets often represent them as temporary transitional means of helping facilitate weight loss. And because a high-fat diet induces fasting mimicking effects, for example, the hunger blunting that's associated with ketosis, they'll justify whatever the downside negative effects are because the net weight loss outweighs the damage that's being done from being on this high-fat, high-protein diet, particularly over the short run. And they may be right. They may be that as bad as the high-protein, high-fat diets are, they're not as bad as the high-protein, high-fat, sugary diets that are making up the conventional food that people are making. But something being less bad doesn't make it good. It just makes it less bad. So I'm not going to argue, well, this diet's less bad than that diet, therefore we should recommend it. On the other hand, if you want to sell 10 million books, you need to tell people what they want to hear. And what they want to hear is that they can continue to indulge in their short-term pleasure-seeking, self-indulgent behaviors and somehow get away with it. They can overcome the laws of nature, violate the laws of physics. They can get the results they want without having to make any kind of sacrifices. And what we're trying to tell people is that, look, health results from healthful living. From our opinion, based on our experience and our review of the scientific literature, the diet that seems to be most health-promoting is a whole plant food diet, and that eliminates or at least minimizes the use of these commonly added chemicals in the form of salt, oil, and sugar.
What low-carb diets recommend getting your body into ketosis, and what's wrong with that?
Well, the reason they want to get you into ketosis is in large part because of the hunger blunting mechanism that goes along with it. And the benefits that they're likely deriving is the benefit of getting less excess calories in. So that's why they call them fasting mimicking diets. They're trying to mimic the benefits that we know are associated with fasting by doing something that doesn't require the vigors of actually fasting. So by eliminating the carbohydrate from the diet, your body, like in fasting, is forced to burn fat. It produces ketone bodies, and there's a hunger blunting effect. The problem is doing it that way and trying to sustain that long term results in downstream health compromise. So we don't really want to do that long term, even though there may be some short term benefit, i.e. rapid weight loss, associated with this diet. What we're interested in is encouraging people to adopt a health-promoting diet and lifestyle. Over the long run, they will progressively lose their excess weight, they will reverse the diseases that are reversible, and most importantly, it's sustainable. And we've been able to demonstrate that in patients that are doing this for literally decades now, and being able to look and see the direct clinical consequences. As a clinician, that's really, you can read all the books you want, you can look at all the science, you can do your best to interpret, but really what weighs most heavily is seeing the patient that comes in, they're sick, they recover their health, and then they're able to sustain those results following the prescription that you're advocating. And we're in a unique position at the True North Health Center because we have the patients come with us for weeks or months or sometimes even longer, where we're actually able to control their environment. And so you see the consequences of your advice. And if your advice is good, the results should be good, and it is.